welcome to another video from Byte Analytics. Now, if I was to ask you to list the top 5 activities which people do with their data, then we wouldn't get very far without mentioning grouping. Grouping is the backbone to working with data, whether that's in Excel, whether it's in SQL Server or Oracle or Power BI within the data lake. Regardless of which platform you are working with, grouping is just the backbone to working with data, and it's used so commonly that we don't even realize it sometimes. Now in Power BI, there are different ways to group your data. You can use Power Query to group your data. You can use DAX functions to group your data. You can create custom groups within Power BI as well. But from time to time, all of these options may fall short of creating a custom group which represents your structures and your totals. So let's explore the option of how we can create custom grouping methods by essentially creating our own dimension tables and defining our own logic to create much more powerful dynamic grouping. Let's jump over to Power BI and see how we can achieve this. Here we are in Power BI, and I have loaded here the evergreen AdventureWorks database. So let's just explore the data here within the table view. What I've got, I have a table called sales territory. And in here, you can see I've got various levels of groupings which I can use. I've got the sales territory region, which is what we're going to use in this example. And in here, I can see Northwest, Northeast, Central, Southwest, Southeast, and so on as per the screen. What I actually want to do is create something which is even more custom than what I can see on screen here. Maybe I want to align France and Germany in one particular group, and then maybe Canada and Australia in another group. How do I actually do that on the same table without creating multiple table visuals, but at the same time maintaining the totals and the subtotals? Let's take a look at how we can do that. So in order to do that, we need to define our own structure for the table. So firstly, let's come over to the Home tab and click on Enter Data. And I'm going to call this column, the first column is asking us for the name. I'm going to call this country. And now I'm going to click in the first row and type in the attribute members as I want to see them. So that's going to be France, and that's going to be Germany, and I'm going to call this subtotal 1. And the next grouping I want is going to be Canada, and let's just pick United Kingdom. And this one, I want this to be called subtotal 2. Now already you can see here, this is a structure which is by default not available to me in the semantic model. I can drag the country out into a table. I can maybe filter it down to France, Germany, Canada, and United Kingdom. But how do I then create the subtotals? I probably would get some subtotals by default, but this method is going to give me even more control over what I want to show and even more control over the calculations that I want to perform. So let's create another column here, and let's call this index, and let's order these. So the first one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Perfect. So now we have our sort order, and let's call this table custom group. Great. And let's click load. Let's head back over to the report canvas, and now we can see our custom group table is available. So let's just click on country, and that lands in a table visual by default. You can see it's not currently sorted, so let's click on the country attribute and choose to sort by index. And now that is the structure that I wanted to see. So how do we get our measures to work in correlation to this structure here? So we need to create a dynamic measure for that. So let's go over to the Home tab and click on New Measure. Let's call this custom value. And I'm going to create some variables here. So the first one is going to be called France value. And it's going to be based on a measure I already have. I already have the sales amount. And what I want to do now actually is I want to filter on the region. So that is going to be the sales territory region, which we've looked at, equals France. Perfect. Let's copy that. And let's continue to create some more variables here. And this one is going to be Germany. So let's delete France here and call that Germany. And in our filter as well, we are going to call that Germany. Let's continue and create two more variables here. That one is going to be called Canada. And let's do the same for the filter. And the final one, we need to call this UK. Let's abbreviate it here and let's give this United Kingdom. Perfect. Now it's time to return some logic using those variables. So let's do return, come down to the next line, and we're going to use the switch statement here. So switch, and we're going to do a switch on the selected value for this column here. So for that, let's initiate the function selected value. And now let's type in country, which is going to give us the option of our custom group and country, which we've just defined. So let's pick that there. And now let's move to the next line and feed in some logic. So we want to say if the country is France, then we want to show the France value variable. If the country is Germany, then we want to show Germany value. Now this is interesting because we're now coming up to the subtotal, so we need to be able to add together two values. So that should be quite easy. So we need to check for what that line is going to say. So if our line is going to read subtotal 1, then actually what we want it to do is add together the France value with the Germany value. And let's continue. So next, if our table value is reading Canada, then we want to pick the Canada value. And lastly, if it's United Kingdom, we want to give it the UK value. Let's just do the total again. So if the last line is subtotal 2, then we want to do Canada value plus UK value. Perfect. And let's hit enter. So let's just review what we've done here. We've created a measure, a dynamic measure, and we are storing the value of sales amount filtered for each country respective in our table here, which is France, Germany, Canada, and United Kingdom. Let's just spell that correctly. So we're storing those values inside of these variables. We're then using the switch statement to iterate over our custom table. Remember, this is the custom table we created ourselves. This is the structure we want, and we have defined this. So now we're just checking each value as we move through the rows of this custom table. So if the row is on France, then we want to give it the value for the France value variable. If it's on Germany, we want to give it the Germany value variable. And if it's a subtotal, we want to add the two together. And similarly, we do the same for Canada and United Kingdom. And let's once again spell that properly. Okay, now the benefit of this approach is that we have full control over how we iterate through the members of the actual attribute, and we can select particular members if we want, and we can even control the calculation. So in this case, we're adding together two values to produce a subtotal. But if this was a percentage calculation, for example, we can even perform a division, and the same measure will be used to provide a absolute value, a whole number, and a percentage value as well. So let's just click on the green here, and let's see how we can use this measure inside our table. So let's click on custom value, and as you can see now, our table is showing us the values for each one of the countries as well as the subtotal, and once again the values for the two countries here as well as the subtotal. Now, what you might want to do, since you've got a custom table here, you may wish to turn off the totals at the bottom of the table. So that is within the properties of the table, we can actually turn those off, and now we don't have a grand total. Alternatively, we can leave them on, but you see we don't actually have a total by default. And that is something we can go back to the measure to control. So let's just go to the measure at the top here again. And so far we have checked the existence of each row based on our defined structure. What we can do is define the condition which falls outside of each one of those values, and that is going to form our total. So in the else condition, effectively, we can place a comma in here, and we can say if it's neither of those values, then what we want to do is add together all of those values to give us the grand total. So let's do that here. So let's do France value plus Germany value plus Canada value plus UK value. And let's click on OK. And now what you see is we have a grand total at the bottom of the table visual itself. So we have subtotals defined based on our own criteria and the structure which we've defined ourselves, and we can control showing or not showing the total at the bottom of this table as well. So that's how we can create custom structures and custom groupings within our Power BI data models, which are not available natively or supported by the semantic model directly.